Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of our conversations here on TexasSports.com with members of the Longhorn coaching staff. My name is Craig Way. Glad to have you with us, and very pleased to be joined by the Longhorns head men's basketball coach Shaka Smart, who joins us now. Okay, first things first, I've got to ask you, the hat you're wearing, is that because did I hear that since you walked off the floor in Kansas City on March 11th when we had to leave and could not play against Texas Tech, that you've not grown your hair? Is that correct?
That is true, Craig. I cut my hair that morning, in anticipation for our game against Texas Tech, like I normally do. And I believe that was March 13th, and haven't cut it since.
Okay, so is it possible then that you actually have more hair on your head right now, the top of your, than I have on my face since all this started? Is that possible?
It's comparable for sure. And it's definitely the case that I have more hair than I've had really ever since I started coaching.
How do you feel about that? I mean, is that something you want to keep, or is it when we get back to normalcy that you're going to go back to the regular look?
Yeah, I'll probably go back to my regular look, but right now with us, working from home and a lot of people, yourself included, are growing beards, and I definitely wasn't going to do that. So it's just a chance to try something a little bit different. It's a conversation piece with the guys. They like to laugh at me when we get on our Zoom calls. So it's certainly something that's temporary.
Well, that's where I wanted to start, as I have with most of the coaches on these chats, is determining the amount of normalcy that you can have given our current status and where we are in the situation, how you deal with that. If you can kind of describe what it's been like in communication with your guys, both in the Zooms and with texting and just regular communication with them.
It's been good. The guys have been terrific about staying in contact with our coaching staff, with our strength coaches, with our trainers. We have a lot of guys, as you know, that are recovering from injury from this past season. And then most importantly, with each other. That's, to me, the biggest part is guys staying connected as a team. The guys have done a really good job with the academic side of things up to this point. Obviously, it's a huge adjustment for everybody going to online classes and not being able to physically be in a classroom with the professors. So that's been a huge emphasis, just because it always is at this time of year when you're coming off of your season. But it's been like anybody else. It's been challenging for the guys to get adjusted to this new normal. We've really challenged our guys to get past being bored, because that's one of our cultural principles, is get past hard. Well, in this case, hard sometimes is bored, which is a common human reaction to not being able to leave your home. But there are certain things that you can do to get outside of yourself and challenge yourself, do something a little bit different than maybe what you normally would at this time of your life.
All right, so here's a question that I've heard asked with regard to student athletes, no matter where they are, whether it's University of Texas or any other institution, when they're having to do the online classes, the online lectures, the online learning, how challenging is it for them? The feedback that you've gotten where they don't have the tutor at first ready response right there. How do they manage all of that as they manage their academic load this semester?
Well, I ask them that all the time, actually. That's a common question: is it harder? Is it easier? Is it about the same? And it's really been a mixed bag in terms of the results of that question. I was on with Kamaka Hepa yesterday on a Zoom call, and he was really stressed out. As you know, he's a phenomenal student. He's a guy that takes a lot of pride in his grades. He's not someone that's going to say, hey, let me just take this class pass fail, which is an option right now for students, but he wants to get an A. So without having the opportunity to interact in person with, as you mentioned, whether it's tutors or Kat Hastings, our academic advisor, or the professors themselves, that can be a little bit stressful. But Kat's done a terrific job every day communicating with our guys over Zoom, over FaceTime, just normal calls, texts. So there's not a lot of grass that grows underneath, what's happening. That she's staying on top of it, and the guys are doing a really good job so far.
I would imagine this comes as absolutely no surprise to you. I know it doesn't come as any surprise to me that your 4.0 student is the most concerned about the slightest thing that might disrupt an otherwise perfect academic realm as he has had.
For sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, we all, have areas that are very, very strong emphasis and points of emphasis for us. And that's one for him, thankfully, that he's done a phenomenal job in. And I've got a sneaking suspicion that he's going to be just fine and finish up really well.
The other thing in the early parts of these conversations that I've had has been about health. First and foremost, everybody wants to know that everybody's okay, that nobody's been affected by the virus or anything like that. But then in the case of your team, when we left off, you still had guys injured even as recently as 24 hours before tip with Brock Cunningham with that severe ankle injury there. Can you bring everybody up to speed on where your injured guys are, those who were out of the lineup going into Kansas City and who were nursing their way through injuries, and then obviously Brock getting hurt in the workout the day before the Big 12 tournament that never got to be played?
Yeah, the general answer is they're all moving forward and making progress. And then there's a lot of specific guys to get into if you'd like me to. Mm-hmm. We even have a couple guys that were playing, but they were playing through, some injuries and some challenges. Start with Jace Febres and Donovan Williams. As you know, they had surgery just before the Big 12 tournament, independent of each other, of course. But they both were not able to come to Kansas City because they were each recovering from a knee surgery. Both are doing really well. Jace's recovery isn't anywhere near as long as Donovan's. Donovan's surgery was pretty extensive, so he's going to be out and recovering for quite some time. The hope and the plan is for him to be at 100% by the time the season rolls around. Knock on wood, hopefully that time is when we would want it to be. But both those guys are making progress. Then you have Jericho Sims and Gerald Liddell both had stress fractures in their backs. Jericho was diagnosed a little bit later than Gerald, so he has a little bit further to go, but he's making a lot of progress. Gerald is doing great. He's actually been cleared to do some minor basketball activities, not cleared yet to play live. But there's not a lot of people playing live right now. So those guys are making progress. Then you mentioned Brock turned his ankle the day before we were supposed to play. That was a significant, ankle sprain, but he's working his way back from that and getting closer to 100%. Matt Coleman, as you know, had the heel injury. That was a nagging injury that he deserves a lot of credit for fighting through because he was in a lot of pain. As you noticed as you were watching the games, there was times where it looked like he was kind of walking on the front half of his foot so that he didn't put any pressure on that heel. And he's making progress coming back from that, but he's also, unfortunately, has a history of plantar fasciitis. So those things kind of interacted with each other, and he's making progress, but I wouldn't say he's all the way pain-free there. And then, like I said, just, some other guys on our team, normal challenges throughout the season when you go through the twists and turns of a college basketball season, but they're all moving in the right direction.
And I would imagine also that nobody wants there to be this much downtime, but the downtime, at least from a healing perspective, has kind of helped all these guys, hasn't it?
It has. I'll tell you a funny story. I was talking to Donovan Williams the other day, and like I said, he's going to be out for quite some time because of the knee surgery he had. And as you know, it was just kind of a matter of time until he was going to have that surgery. He also deserves a lot of credit for playing and practicing throughout the whole season, the whole fall and winter, with some pain, with some swelling in his knee, and really doing a good job fighting through that. But I was talking to him the other day, and he said, yeah, the one silver lining of all this is I'm not really behind anyone else, because right now, if it was a normal time, everyone would be on the court playing, but I'm here and I wouldn't get to do that. But now everybody's stuck at home.
mentally, and the first guy that comes to my mind when I even bring this up, mentally, the first guy that comes to my mind is Courtney Ramey, about guys who work themselves mentally so hard, and they're so intense about what they do. How does a guy like Courtney, nevertheless, even all the rest of your guys, deal with the inactivity of actual basketball off-season work, or at least limited in the things that they can do right now?
Well, that's the biggest challenge, Craig. Remember, these guys truly see themselves as having the identity of basketball player. And I was the same way when I was their age. I mean, you couldn't tell me anything about anything else. You know, my mom made sure I got good grades. So I did, worked hard in school. But in terms of the way I saw myself, in terms of the way our guys see themselves, it is as a basketball player. Obviously, our job is to try to help cultivate the other areas of them as well. But now they're at home and they're not able to at least play basketball with all the people around them. Now, some of our guys have a little bit more access to basketball than others. Um, there's a local guy on our team that is very, very good at finding basketball courts. And you could probably guess who that is. But for Courtney, for all of our guys, that's, again, one of the biggest challenges is I see myself as a basketball player. I know I want to get better and be great at this game, but I'm being restricted right now in terms of my access to even being able to shoot a basketball or play the game, even one-on-one. And that's a real challenge that we're trying to help our guys through.
Nutrition. That's a question that Coach Herman and I were talking about with guys. Of course, he has a huge amount of guys to be concerned with regard to nutrition, but all head coaches have that concern about their guys. How well are they taking? I know you've talked about as well the fuel that goes into the body, and Coach Hootie and the strength staff as well, and your nutrition staff, how they're dealing with all of that.
No, it's a great point, Craig. And I think one of the biggest things for all of us to take out of this is having an added appreciation and gratitude for the great things in our lives. So an example of that is University of Texas Athletic Department does a phenomenal job supporting our student athletes nutritionally, supporting the student athletes in terms of the things they need to go into their bodies. And now, because no one's on campus, or very, very few people are on campus, it's much, much more challenging to do that. So when we do get the opportunity to come back and we do get the opportunity to sit down in the tank and have a meal, I can promise you this, there's going to be a huge emphasis from our staff to our players that, hey, don't take this thing for granted, man. You know, you're used to doing it every day, but there's a long stretch of time where you couldn't. In terms of our guys right now, it's a real challenge. It's part of our job is to kind of monitor what they're eating and how they're eating and how they're working out, how they're taking care of themselves. It's a mixed bag. You know, everyone has different backgrounds and different resources that are available to them. And, Amy Cope and her staff are doing everything they can under the rules to try to support the guys. But it's much, much more difficult to do that when someone is, say, halfway across the country, or in Kamaka Hepa's case, all the way on the north side of the hemisphere. It's much more difficult to do that than if they were here.
You brought up Kamaka. I'll go roll back to him, but for folks who don't know, he's up in Ukivik, Alaska. So he's up there. So how do is communication as easy as it is, say, with Brock Cunningham and Will Baker, who are a couple of miles away from campus?
There's a couple challenges just because he's so far away. There's a time difference just to be aware of. So, there's been times where I've gone to call him relatively early in the morning, and then I got to remember that I think it's 3 hours behind where we are. And then sometimes, depending on where he is, the internet connection isn't as good. But he's done a great job of staying in close contact. Like I said, we had a Zoom call yesterday, and we were supposed to watch some tape and get into some basketball stuff, but we didn't even get to that. We spent the whole hour kind of talking about how he's doing, talking about, some spiritual growth that he's working on, talking about his academics. And again, I think that the most important thing right now for us, particularly because we're a sport that even in a normal year wouldn't play a game for 6 more months, we have to remember that the first and foremost is our guys, as you mentioned, their health, their mental health, making sure they're moving forward as people and not succumbing to the habits that you might normally succumb to when you go home, which is just laying around and playing video games and watching TV.
We're about to have a conversation about something you and I have never discussed before, but that's the latest member of your team with Greg Brown signing his letter of intent. Obviously, I've seen the quotes and the excitement on his part, the Instagram video things, the excitement and the quotes as well from your side as well. But for Longhorn fans who are hearing this from you for the first time about Greg, describe, if you will, because I know there was a lot invested on the part of you and Jay Lucas in getting to know not only Greg, but his family as well, and then ultimately what he's bringing to the program.
Well, he's a great kid from a terrific family, very, very hard worker. He's very driven in the game of basketball. Obviously has huge goals and, big goals, not just individually, but as a team as well, which is pretty exciting. He texted me a couple of days ago and he said, "What do I need to do to impact this team?" And so I wrote him back and I said, "Well, do you mean right now or when the games start?" And he said, "When the games start, LOL." So that's obviously a conversation that we've had many, many times during the recruiting process, but it shows a level of awareness on his part to ask it again now that he's actually a member of our team. So we got on the phone and had a kind of a long conversation about some of the things that we feel like he's going to be able to do to impact winning and impact his teammates on the court. He's a young man that really works hard, has a great work ethic. He's out there, right now running miles on the street because he can't do as much on the court. And so we're excited about him joining our returning players and being a part of, a very, very special group of guys that we think has a chance to have a great year.
How would you rate him athletically speaking with the guys, not only the current guys you have, but guys that you've recruited throughout all of your years in coaching? Where does Greg fit in terms of the athletic skill set that he possesses?
That's a great question. There's so many different ways to define athleticism. Jackson Hayes, for instance, was so good at quick twitch movements for someone that size, getting out of a pick and roll, for instance, and sprinting to the rim and then getting off his feet to catch and dunk the ball. Kerwin Roach is probably the best athlete that we've ever had all around. Just a combination of fast twitch muscle fibers, speed, quickness, jumping ability. The thing I'll say about Greg is he has the best combination of athleticism, but also a violence combined with that athleticism. You hear that word a lot in football, but it's also very, very important in basketball. You think of some of the best players in the game. Obviously, the Bulls documentary going on right now, a guy like Jordan, a guy like LeBron James, a guy like Kevin Durant. Those guys are athletic, but they also have the ability to make these violent movements that make them so effective on the court.
I wanted to ask you about your progress on adding a member to your coaching staff. Obviously, we were all excited for Luke Yaklich, him getting the position at Illinois Chicago, but losing him to UIC puts a hole there on your staff, and a big one at that with the contributions that Luke made last year. Where are you right now in your evaluation and what you are able to do and can do as you work toward filling that vacancy?
Well, first of all, you mentioned Jay along with Greg Brown. I did want to make sure that, I mentioned he did a phenomenal job throughout the recruitment of Greg Brown with communication and, just really being on top of everything involved with Greg and his family. And, Jay deserves a lot of credit for that. You mentioned Luke, happy for him. He's, I think, the third assistant coach in 3 years that's gotten a head coaching job from our program. And as someone that's been through that process as an assistant coach. That's one of the most exciting times in your career. So we're really excited for him and his family. The process for us is a little bit different just because we don't have the ability to get together with people in person like we normally do. So it's all been done over Zoom calls or just over normal phone calls, trying to do a lot of research. I think because of just the nature of what everybody's going through right now, it's even more important to take our time and really get a sense for who people are. The toughest thing, Craig, is really understanding who someone is, not so much during, really, really steady, easy times, but finding out who someone's going to be when the chips are down, who someone's going to be during challenges, during pressure, when there's stress. Because I think anytime you're in a competitive environment, like certainly high level college sports, that's really what matters, who you are as a player or as a coach during those times.
Uh, you brought up the docuseries, The Last Dance. I've got to ask you about it because having grown up where you grew up and having been the fan of Michael Jordan and those Bulls teams, I thought about you as I've watched these first four installments, these first four episodes. What's your take on it? What's your players' take on it as well?
Well, it's just fascinating, Craig. I mean, you and I could sit and talk about it for hours. There's so many takeaways. And for that reason, what we're doing as a program is I'm asking each one of our players every Sunday after they watch to give me feedback on what was most impactful to them. And just one thing from each, really not even each episode, because there's two shown on each day, on each Sunday. So just one thing that impacted them. And it's been really, really interesting to hear from the guys. And it's been a wide variety of different areas that they've noticed. The most impactful thing to me, Craig, that I got from this past weekend was the fact that Michael Jordan, the guy that we all, or most of us that are sane, see as the best player to ever play this game, even he had to go through times where he felt like people didn't believe in him. He faced adversity. He had, doubters. He had, this fascinating watching him go through that Cleveland Cavaliers series where everybody picked against him. And then when he finally hit the game-winning shot in the last game to win the series, to see the incredible emotion and passion that he let out at that moment, to say, that's right, I did it. I did it to show you. That's something that's really, really powerful for our guys and our program to take from that.
Final thing here, and I'll close with how I close with all the coaches, and that is to ask you to describe what's your ongoing message to your players, to your guys right now as we still navigate through all this. What's the ongoing message?
Well, I'd say three things, Craig, that we've really tried to convey to our guys. Number one, let's go one day at a time, and let's win the day. Let's be the best we can be today. Let's not succumb to certain tendencies that we might normally have when we go home. Because remember, Craig, our guys are on campus almost year round. So when they do get a small break, when they do get a chance to go home, that is like chill mode, understandably. This is different. They're home. They've been home now for, we're going on 2 months. So trying to win the day and be the best we can be in the actual day we're in. And sometimes what that means is just, treating yourself well, whether it's with the way you're eating, whether it's, something you're doing through, mental health, opportunities. That stuff is huge. So that's the first thing. The second thing is communication, just making sure that we stay in close communication with each other. Have to remember that, as a program, we're a brotherhood, we are family, we care about one another. It's important that we check on one another. Player A may be having a tough day on Monday, but player B may be having a great day. So that's a great time for them to interact with each other, and player B lift up player A, and then it might be vice versa later in the week. So communication would be the second thing. And then I think the third thing, And Chris Del Conte deserves a ton of credit for the message that he's given to the athletic staff in this regard. And that is, let's not get way ahead of ourselves. Let's not jump to conclusions about, what's going to happen or what might happen. Obviously, we're keeping an eye on the trends. We're keeping an eye on the numbers. We're listening to the health experts. But really, what we need to do is take this thing in 1 or 2 or 3 week intervals and really see what changes, and not really jump ahead several months and say, hey, in October, this is going to happen, or, basketball is going to become this. We don't know that yet. And that's a little bit uncomfortable. That can be a little disconcerting sometimes, but that's our reality. So if we can be the best we can be in the present moment, that gives us the best chance that whenever we do get the call to come back, be in the best position.
Well, you brought up health. Certainly, we wish you and Maya and Zora and your family and everybody else the best of health as well as we continue to go through this. Appreciate the time. Look forward to seeing you down the road here.
Thank you, Craig. Great to see you.
You too. All right. That's Longhorns head coach Shaka Smart joining us here on TexasSports.com.